She called me basic for shopping at clearance. So I bought the last dress in her size and wore it first. The fluorescent lights in the department store cast that familiar harsh glow over everything, making even the most beautiful clothes look slightly artificial. I was methodically working my way through the clearance rack, my fingers dancing over fabrics and price tags, when I heard it. That laugh. Sharp, cutting, designed to wound. "Oh my God, look at her!" The voice carried across the store section with deliberate volume. Still shopping clearance like she's in college. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Melissa Richardson, my former college roommate, current coworker, and the woman who had made it her personal mission to remind me of my place in the social hierarchy at every possible opportunity. But I turned anyway, because sometimes you need to see the knife before you can properly avoid it. She was standing near the designer section with two other women from our office, Jessica and Amanda, both of whom I'd always considered friendly acquaintances. They were all holding expensive bags, clearly on some sort of group shopping trip that I hadn't been invited to. Not that I would have wanted to go, but the exclusion still stung in that familiar way. "Some people never learn to invest in quality," Melissa continued, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that she'd perfected over our 3 years of working together. "It's so basic. Basic." There it was. Her favorite word, wielded like a weapon. She'd been calling me basic for years, ever since college when I'd chosen to study at the library instead of going to her expensive dinner parties, when I'd worn Target clothes instead of designer brands, when I'd dated guys who worked regular jobs instead of trust fund babies. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, that cocktail of embarrassment and anger that I'd grown accustomed to whenever Melissa decided to make me her target. The worst part wasn't even the comment itself. It was the way Jessica and Amanda laughed along, the way they nodded in agreement, as if my financial prudence was some kind of character flaw. I turned back to the clearance rack, my hands trembling slightly as I continued browsing. This was nothing new. Melissa had been undermining me since college, but it had gotten worse since we'd both ended up at the same marketing firm. She was in a senior position, thanks to family connections and her ability to schmooze with the executives, while I was still climbing the ladder the hard way through actual work and competence. The comments weren't limited to shopping habits. She'd make snide remarks about my apartment, cozy, said with a smirk that meant small, my car, a reliable Honda that she called vintage, despite being only 5 years old, my lunch choices, homemade instead of the trendy restaurants she frequented, and especially my dating life. "Still single, Sarah?" she'd ask at office gatherings, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe you should try dating apps, though I guess you'd need better photos for that." Always the little digs, the subtle implications that I wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't good enough, wasn't enough, period. What made it worse was that people seemed to buy into her narrative. Melissa was beautiful in that conventional way that photographs well for social media blonde, thin, always perfectly put together. She drove a BMW that Daddy had bought her, lived in a penthouse apartment that Daddy's connections had secured, and wore clothes that cost more than my monthly salary. She was everything I wasn't, and she made sure everyone knew it. But standing there in that store, listening to her mock me for being financially responsible, something shifted. Maybe it was the stress of the past few months at work, where Melissa had been taking credit for projects I'd worked on. Maybe it was the loneliness of being excluded from office social events. Maybe it was just the accumulation of 3 years of constant, subtle humiliation. Whatever it was, I felt something harden inside me, like a coal being compressed into a diamond. I continued browsing, but now I was listening intently to their conversation. They were discussing some charity gala that was coming up, the Morrison Foundation event, which was apparently the social event of the season. Melissa was going on about her dress, a designer piece that had cost $3,000. "It's one of a kind," she was saying, The designer only made 3 in this color and I had to pull serious strings to get one. It's going to be perfect for the gala. I knew about the Morrison Foundation Gala. Everyone at our company knew about it. It was where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen while raising money for children's literacy programs. Melissa had been talking about it for months, not because she cared about literacy, but because it was her chance to network with potential clients and show off for the partners at our firm. That's when I saw it. Hanging innocuously on the clearance rack, marked down from $800 to $99, was a dress that made my breath catch. It was stunning. A deep emerald green silk that seemed to shimmer under the harsh store lights, with a classic silhouette that was both elegant and timeless. The designer label made my eyes widen. This wasn't just any dress. This was the kind of piece that should have been in the expensive section, not marked down to clearance prices. I held it up, checking the size. It was a size 6, which was perfect for me. But more importantly, I suddenly remembered something Melissa had mentioned weeks ago during one of her many monologues about her perfect life. She'd been complaining about how hard it was to find designer clothes in her size because she was between sizes, sometimes a 6, sometimes an 8, but 6 fit her better for formal events. My heart started beating faster as I examined the dress more carefully. It was absolutely flawless. No stains, no tears, no visible wear. Someone had probably bought it for a special occasion, worn it once, and returned it. Or maybe it had been a gift that didn't fit. Whatever the reason, it was here, marked down to less than 1/10 of its original price. And it was exactly Melissa's size. I glanced over at where she was still holding court, describing her expensive gala dress in excruciating detail. An idea began to form, delicious and dangerous. What if Melissa wasn't the only one who could play the game of appearances? What if the basic girl could show up looking anything but basic? I took the dress to the fitting room, my hands shaking slightly with excitement and nervousness. Under the unflattering fluorescent lights, it looked even more stunning. The silk felt luxurious against my skin, and the cut was incredibly flattering. It fit like it had been made for me, highlighting my figure in all the right ways while maintaining an air of sophisticated elegance. Standing in front of the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. This wasn't the clearance shopping basic Sarah that Melissa loved to mock. This was a woman who could hold her own in any room, who could command attention and respect. The dress didn't just fit my body, it fit my newfound resolve. I bought the dress without hesitation, along with a pair of clearance shoes that complemented it perfectly. The total was still less than what Melissa probably spent on a single lunch at her favorite restaurant. As I walked past her group on my way out, I made sure she couldn't see what was in my bag. The last thing I heard was her voice, still going on about her exclusive, one-of-a-kind dress. Over the next few weeks, I began preparing for what I was already thinking of as my debut. The Morrison Foundation Gala was invitation only, but I had something Melissa didn't know about. I volunteered with their literacy program on weekends, something I'd been doing quietly for over a year. When I reached out to my contact there about purchasing a ticket, they were thrilled to hear from me and offered me a volunteer coordinator ticket at a significantly reduced price. I didn't tell anyone at work that I was going. Let it be a surprise. But the dress was only part of my plan. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I made an appointment at a high-end salon, using some of the money I'd saved from my careful budgeting over the years. I booked a makeup artist for the night of the event. I even splurged on accessories, a vintage necklace from an estate sale that looked far more expensive than it was, and a clutch bag that I found at a consignment shop. The preparation became a meditation on transformation. Each step was deliberate, purposeful. I wasn't just getting ready for a party. I was becoming someone new. Someone who wouldn't be dismissed, overlooked, or mocked. Someone who could play Melissa's game and play it better. During this time, I also threw myself into work with renewed energy. The literacy program had given me an idea for a new client campaign that could be revolutionary for our firm. I worked on it during my lunch breaks and evenings, crafting a presentation that showcased not just creativity, but deep understanding of community engagement and social responsibility. I scheduled a meeting with the partners for the day after the gala. If Melissa wanted to use the event for networking, I'd make sure I had something substantial to back up any connections I made. The night of the gala arrived with all the anticipation of a long-awaited confrontation. I took my time getting ready, savoring each step of the transformation. The dress looked even more stunning than I remembered, the silk catching the light in my apartment like liquid emerald. The makeup artist had worked magic, creating a look that was sophisticated and striking without being overdone. My hair was swept up in an elegant chignon that made my neck look longer and my face more angular. Looking in the mirror, I felt powerful in a way I'd never experienced before. This wasn't about revenge, exactly, though there was certainly an element of that. This was about reclaiming myself, about refusing to be defined by someone else's narrow definition of worth. I arrived at the gala fashionably late, which was entirely intentional. The venue was stunning, a historic mansion with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place that whispered old money and established power. I could see why Melissa was so excited about being here. It was exactly the kind of scene she lived for. I paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath. Once I walked through those doors, there would be no going back. I was about to step into Melissa's world and show her that I belonged there, just as much as she did, if not more. The first person I saw was James Mitchell, one of the senior partners at our firm. He was standing near the bar, talking to a small group of people I didn't recognize. What surprised me was his reaction when he saw me. His face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. "Sarah, I had no idea you were going to be here tonight," he said, walking over to greet me. "You look absolutely stunning." "Thank you, James. I volunteer with the literacy program, so I couldn't miss their biggest event of the year." I watched his expression change as he processed this information. This was something Melissa had never mentioned in any of her networking conversations. The fact that I was already connected to the cause they were supporting tonight, that I had been quietly contributing to it for over a year. "That's wonderful," he said, and I could hear the genuine respect in his voice. "I'd love to hear more about your work with them. Would you like to meet some of the board members?" As James introduced me around, I began to realize something I hadn't expected. The dress was working. I looked the part. I felt confident. But what was really opening doors was my genuine connection to the cause. These weren't just wealthy people looking for a tax write-off. Many of them were genuinely passionate about literacy and education, and they were excited to meet someone who was already working in the trenches. I was deep in conversation with the Foundation's president about reading intervention programs when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" I turned slowly, savoring the moment. Melissa was standing there in her $3,000 dress, which was lovely, but not nearly as striking as she'd made it sound, with her mouth slightly open in shock. Jessica and Amanda flanked her, looking equally surprised. "Hello, Melissa," I said calmly. "I volunteer with the literacy program. I wouldn't miss their biggest fundraiser." I watched her process this information, saw the moment when her eyes really took in my appearance. The dress, the hair, the makeup, the confidence. It was a complete transformation from the woman she'd mocked in the department store just weeks ago. That's a beautiful dress," she said, her voice lacking its usual bite. "Thank you," I replied smoothly. "I got it on clearance. Sometimes you can find amazing pieces if you know how to shop." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Here I was, in a dress that had cost less than $100, outshining her $3,000 designer piece. The clearance dress fit me perfectly, complemented my coloring beautifully, and had garnered compliments all evening. Her expensive dress, while lovely, seemed to pale in comparison, not because of its quality, but because of how it was worn. "Ladies," James Mitchell appeared at my elbow. "I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen, one of our most promising associates. Sarah has been doing incredible work with our literacy program campaign, and she's been volunteering with the foundation for over a year." I watched Melissa's face as she realized that not only was I here, not only did I look stunning, but I was also being recognized professionally in a way that she had never been. Her networking strategy of showing up and looking pretty suddenly seemed rather superficial next to my genuine involvement and expertise. The evening continued to unfold like a perfectly choreographed dance. I was introduced to potential clients, board members, and other professionals who were genuinely interested in my work and ideas. Meanwhile, I could see Melissa struggling to find her footing in conversations where substance mattered more than appearance. The turning point came when the foundation's president asked me to say a few words about the literacy program during the formal dinner portion of the evening. It wasn't planned. She had been impressed by our earlier conversation and thought the audience would benefit from hearing about ground-level volunteer work. Standing at the podium in my clearance dress, looking out at a room full of the city's elite, I felt a surge of confidence that had nothing to do with what I was wearing and everything to do with who I had become. I spoke about the children I worked with, the progress I'd seen, the importance of the foundation's work. It wasn't a long speech, but it was heartfelt and genuine. The applause was enthusiastic, and afterward, people kept approaching me to continue the conversation. I found myself at the center of exactly the kind of networking opportunities that Melissa had been hoping for, but mine were based on substance rather than superficial charm. Later in the evening, I overheard a conversation that made everything click into place. Two board members were talking near the bar, and one of them mentioned how refreshing it was to meet someone who was involved in the cause for the right reasons, not just for social climbing. They were clearly contrasting me with other attendees who seemed more interested in being seen than in the actual work. It was then that I realized the full extent of what had happened. My revenge had transformed into something much more meaningful. By refusing to be defined by Melissa's narrow view of worth, by investing in substance over surface, I had not only proven her wrong, but had also opened doors to genuine opportunities and connections. The irony was delicious. Melissa had spent $3,000 on a dress to make an impression at an event where I, in my $99 clearance find, had made the lasting impact. But more than that, her mockery of my basic shopping habits had inadvertently led me to find the perfect dress for the perfect moment. As the evening wound down, Melissa approached me one more time. Her earlier shock had settled into something that looked almost like respect, though it was clearly difficult for her to process. "Sarah," she said, her voice lacking its usual condescending tone, "I had no idea you were so involved with the literacy program. That's really impressive." "I don't talk about it much at work," I replied evenly. "I prefer to let my actions speak for themselves." It was a gentle rebuke, but she understood the message. All her bragging, all her name-dropping, all her emphasis on appearances, it had been revealed as empty posturing next to quiet, consistent action. The following Monday at work was interesting, to say the least. Word had gotten around about the gala, about my speech, about the impression I'd made. Suddenly, colleagues who had never paid much attention to me were stopping by my office to chat. The partners were asking for my input on client strategies. I was invited to meetings that I'd never been included in before. Melissa's reaction was complex. She couldn't openly acknowledge what had happened without admitting that she'd been wrong about me, but she also couldn't ignore the shift in office dynamics. Her subtle put-downs stopped almost entirely, replaced by a careful neutrality that was almost more satisfying than an apology would have been. The real victory came when I presented my literacy-focused campaign to the partners. The ideas I'd developed through my volunteer work, combined with the connections I'd made at the gala, resulted in a proposal that excited everyone in the room. We landed a major client who wanted to partner with the foundation, and I was put in charge of the entire campaign. 6 months later, I was promoted to senior associate, the same level that Melissa had reached through family connections. The difference was that my promotion was based entirely on merit, on the quality of my work and the results I delivered. The clearance dress still hangs in my closet, but I've worn it several times since to client dinners, company events, and other occasions where I wanted to feel confident and powerful. Each time, I remember that moment in the department store when Melissa called me basic for shopping clearance sales. She wasn't entirely wrong. I am basic in some ways. I'm practical, careful with money, more interested in substance than flash. But what she failed to understand is that basic doesn't mean less than. It doesn't mean unworthy of respect or success. Sometimes, basic means having your priorities straight, knowing what really matters, and building something real rather than just something that looks good on the surface. The dress became a symbol, but not in the way I originally intended. It wasn't about proving I could look expensive or fit in with the wealthy crowd. It was about proving that worth isn't determined by price tags or social status. It's about character, contribution, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own value. Melissa learned this lesson too, though it took her longer to accept it. Over time, our relationship evolved from antagonistic to professionally respectful. We'll never be friends, but we no longer need to be enemies. She's still more interested in appearances than I am, still focused on surface-level aspects of success, but she's stopped trying to make me feel small for being different. The literacy program continues to be a passion of mine, and through it, I've built genuine relationships and made a real difference in children's lives. The networking I did at that gala led to career opportunities, but more importantly, it connected me with people who share my values and commitment to meaningful work. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for that moment in the department store. Melissa's cruelty was the catalyst I needed to stop accepting her definition of my worth and start showing the world who I really was. The clearance dress was just the costume. The real transformation was internal. I still shop clearance sales, by the way. Not because I have to anymore, but because I choose to. It's smart, it's practical, and sometimes you find amazing treasures that others overlook. Just like people, the best things aren't always the most expensive ones. Sometimes, the most valuable finds are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone who knows how to recognize their worth. The quiet ones, the practical ones, the basic ones were often underestimated. But that's their mistake, not our weakness. We know who we are, we know what we're worth, and we don't need designer labels to prove it. Sometimes, the most powerful statement you can make is showing up as your authentic self and letting your actions speak louder than your accessories. Melissa called me basic for shopping at clearance, so I bought the last dress in her size and wore it first. But the real revenge wasn't in the dress it was in, discovering that I didn't need her approval to be extraordinary. I just needed to stop hiding my light under a bushel and start letting it shine. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining me on this journey. Maybe you've been the Sarah in someone's story underestimated, overlooked, or made to feel less than. Maybe you've even been Melissa, caught up in appearances and forgetting what really matters. Here's what I want you to remember. Your worth isn't determined by the price tags in your closet, the car in your driveway, or the approval of people who don't truly see you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. The clearance racks of life often hold the greatest treasures. They're just waiting for someone with the wisdom to recognize their value. Don't let anyone make you feel basic for being practical, genuine, or different from their expectations. Your authentic self is your superpower. Use it wisely. Until next time, keep shining clearance finds and all. With love and solidarity, Timeline Stories.